Imagine spending years fighting for your dreams, finally reaching that perfect moment, your wedding day, only to have it shattered by the person you trusted most. What would you do if your own sister crashed your big day, destroyed your wedding cake, and then forced you to choose, keep the peace or finally draw the line? This is a true story about family, boundaries, and what happens when you decide to stop cleaning up someone else's mess. If you've ever been the responsible one, constantly supporting those who never seem to learn, you'll want to hear how this ended. Don't forget to like, comment how you'd handle a situation like this, and follow the channel to hear more unbelievable, real-life stories, because sometimes the greatest freedom comes from letting it all burn, and walking away for good. On my wedding day, my sister caused a huge scene by smashing my cake with champagne and shouting, "This is what you get for acting like you're better." My mom hugged her and said she just needed to let it out. I said nothing. Later that night, I did something no one expected. I withdrew the tuition deposit I had made for her college, froze the co-signed apartment lease, and by 8:40 a.m. the next day, she found out the real news. It's wild how one single moment can rewrite every memory you thought was solid. August 3rd was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. There were 43 guests, soft jazz playing in the background, and the venue was perfectly lit. My fiancée, Emily, looked like someone who had walked straight out of a dream. I had worked incredibly hard for years, taking on consulting gigs, long flights, sleeping on airport benches, getting underpaid just to stay in the game. I finally made something of myself. I thought for once I could celebrate that success. But Bethany didn't see it the same way. She arrived late, which should have been my first clue. The ceremony was already over. She breezed in wearing a gold backless dress like it was prom night. She didn't say hi, didn't smile, she just took a glass of champagne and found a corner. When I caught her eye once, she looked right through me, like I was a stranger. To anyone else, it might have looked like she was just being moody, but I knew Bethany. That silence was only the prelude to what was coming. 3 weeks prior, she had called me crying about her car breaking down again. She had already borrowed $1,200 from me in April for repairs. This time, she said she needed a whole new car and insisted it was urgent. I refused, not because I didn't have the money, but because I was tired of always being her plan B. Honestly, she wasn't even trying anymore, skipping classes, partying with people twice her age, telling our parents she was finding herself. She hung up without saying goodbye. I never imagined she'd take that attitude to my wedding. But she did. She waited until my wedding toast. Just as I stood up to thank everyone for coming, to talk about love and building a life with someone who brings peace, Bethany stood up too. For a moment, I thought she might make a toast herself. My glass was halfway to my mouth when she threw it. The champagne flew in a perfect arc and exploded on the dessert table. It shattered a photo frame of Emily and me smiling at a cliffside in Maui. Then she grabbed the wedding cake and shoved it like she was flipping a table. It didn't just fall, it collapsed. 3 tiers, delicate sugar work, custom flowers, all smeared across the floor. She looked me straight in the eye and shouted loud enough for people outside the venue to hear, "This is what you get for acting like you're better." It became so quiet afterward that I could hear someone's phone buzzing. Some guests looked around, hoping maybe it was a staged act or a prank. It wasn't. My mom rushed over to her like she had been attacked, holding her tightly and saying, "She just needs to let it out." Emily's parents stared at me in disbelief. My best man didn't move. Even the DJ stopped the music. Bethany didn't apologize or show remorse, she didn't even cry. She just walked out, having made her point. I didn't say a word. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew this wasn't the time or place. I refused to let her turn my wedding into her courtroom. I smiled, whispered soft words to Emily, and nodded to the coordinator. The rest of the night limped by. Some guests danced, some pretended nothing had happened, but none could truly recover from the moment. The memory was already stamped. That night at home, Emily was quiet and asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine. I wasn't, but I was focused. While she changed out of her gown, I opened my laptop, logged into the university portal, and revoked the tuition deposit I had made for Bethany last month, $9,400 gone. Then I went to the online rental portal for the apartment lease I co-signed with her. I locked the account and marked it for review, no approval, no rent payment. The lease agreement was now frozen, with rent due in 5 days. Exactly at 8:40 the next morning, Bethany called me. I didn't answer. She sent 3 texts asking what was going on, why the portal was locked, and if I had done it. I didn't reply. That morning wasn't the end of anything, it was just the beginning. When she sent her 6th text, her confusion faded and the last one simply said, "Fix this." I muted my phone and made coffee. I didn't tell Emily immediately, not because I was hiding it, but because I wanted a moment to enjoy the silence. The wedding was over, the chaos was past. After years, I had finally stopped being Bethany's safety net. Around noon, my mom called. I let it ring. Then she left a voicemail saying Bethany was very upset and felt abandoned, asking me to call her back. The irony was mind-blowing. She wasn't abandoned when I co-signed the lease, paid the tuition deposit, covered her overdrafts, bailed her out of a bad Airbnb situation, or sent her $500 just until Friday, which ended up turning into radio silence for 4 weeks. No one called me then to ask how I felt. Bethany didn't speak to me for 2 days after the wedding. Then, unexpectedly, she showed up outside my apartment. Emily saw her through the peephole and refused to open the door. Bethany banged loudly for about 10 minutes, knocking rhythmically like a child starting a fight. Emily finally cracked the door open and asked what she wanted. Bethany didn't say hi, just launched into demands. She said she had 5 days to pay rent, had blown through her summer job money, and was counting on the tuition deposit. She argued I had no right to pull out and had a moral obligation to follow through. Emily lied and said I wasn't home, although I was in the living room. I wasn't interested in speaking through a door, not until Bethany showed some remorse, which she didn't. She left shouting about legal rights and how I couldn't just yank everything without warning. But she was wrong. I checked the lease. I was the primary account holder, she was the resident. Legally, I had every right to pull the plug, and I did. 3 days passed. Bethany sent me an email titled, "Are you seriously doing this?" Inside, she laid out her upcoming expenses, begging me to reinstate the tuition. She threatened she'd have to drop out and said that if she got evicted, it would be my fault. She tried guilt-tripping me, saying she ruined the wedding because she was overwhelmed and that I had been rubbing my success in her face for years. She accused me of letting it go to my head. I didn't respond. I forwarded the email to Emily and wrote, "Your turn to read the circus." Bethany then escalated. She showed up again. This time she waited until Emily came home and tried to slip in behind her. Emily didn't scream. She grabbed Bethany by the arm, pulled her back into the hallway, and warned her that if she tried that again, she'd call the police. Then, without warning, Emily grabbed a fistful of Bethany's hair and shoved her down the hall. Bethany shrieked and stumbled, but Emily didn't flinch. She shut and locked the door as if she'd taken out the trash. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Dad. He sighed and said, "Look, we need to talk about your sister." I asked what exactly he wanted to discuss. He said Bethany was spiraling and I needed to help her land, that what she did at the wedding was just emotions, and I shouldn't take it personally. He told me I was old enough to be the bigger person. I said I had already been that person for years. When he started talking about family unity, I hung up. I knew then what nobody else would admit, Bethany wasn't spiraling. She was just finally falling. After Emily kicked Bethany out, we didn't talk about it right away. It wasn't awkward. We were just quiet. I poured us wine, and we sat on the couch like nothing had happened. But something shifted between us, not bad, but settled, as if Emily had drawn a permanent line in ink, and neither of us had to guess where she stood. Bethany didn't return the next day, but she didn't disappear either. She started sending Emily texts. Apologies mixed with guilt trips, pretending to be mature but always ending with some version of, "he owes me." Emily ignored all of them and blocked Bethany's number after the fourth message. Then Bethany changed tactics. She texted our parents, saying she was being physically attacked and treated like a stray by Emily. She painted herself as the victim, claiming she came to reconcile and was ambushed. That's when the family group chat exploded. Dad added all of us. Me, Emily, Mom, and Bethany, and wrote, "Let's have an honest talk without yelling or blocking. We are still family." Bethany said she felt invisible, hurt, and forgotten, accusing me of rubbing my success in her face for years. Mom chimed in, urging forgiveness, stressing that Bethany was still finding herself, and ended with, "She's still your baby sister." Emily left the chat. I stared at the screen a long time before replying in 3 sentences, "She's not a baby. She's 22 and needs to learn the cost of disrespect." No one responded. 2 days later, I heard through a cousin that Bethany had packed up and left her apartment, couldn't pay rent or find a subletter. The lease company contacted me for final paperwork. I didn't fight it. I signed it to protect my credit and moved on. But Bethany surprised me. She enrolled back in school, under our parents' name. They'd quietly paid the tuition after all her complaints and guilt trips about money. They had the means, they just didn't want to spend it on her and pressure me instead. I was done. I wasn't angry. I just felt clear. Emily and I sat on the balcony that night, drinking cheap wine and eating leftovers. I told her I felt a decade-long weight lifted. She smiled and said, "Good. Now we can live." That was the first night I truly believed it. A week after Bethany left the apartment, it went quiet. No angry texts, no surprise visits. It felt like the storm had passed. Until Mom called abruptly, not with a, "Hi," or "How are you," but with, "You'll be at Dad's birthday next Saturday, right? Bethany will be there. I want you two to talk like adults. Stop being so cold." That struck me as strange. I was supposed to be the cold one, not the sister who trashed a wedding cake, shouted, and depended on me for years only to cause drama. They were mad at me. I hung up without agreeing. Later, Emily and I planned dinner and didn't even bring it up until halfway through the meal. She said we shouldn't go, and I agreed. On the Friday before the party, Bethany sent me a Venmo request for $1,800 labeled "Cake and Broken Frame." LOL. Let's call it even. I handed the phone to Emily and walked out to the balcony. When I returned, she had the calmest look on her face. I asked what she wrote. She shrugged and said, "She's not going to like it." 15 minutes later, Bethany blocked both of us everywhere. We skipped Dad's birthday party. Bethany went, not quietly. She wore a white jumpsuit suspiciously like bridal wear. A cousin sent us photos with a caption, "She's not okay." Bethany brought along some real estate guy she met 2 weeks earlier and told half the guests they were moving in together soon. To the others, she promised, "Big things were coming," repeating that phrase over and over. Then came the twist. Bethany launched a podcast titled Bloodline Bruises, Growing Up with the Golden Child. The teaser dropped on Instagram and TikTok. She said things like, "I thought family meant safety," and, "Sometimes the most toxic people are the ones who share your last name." It was so theatrical it felt scripted. But she wasn't done. At the end of the video, she thanked a therapy app sponsor. The exact one I had introduced to her a year before, when she called me crying from a bathroom stall during a panic attack. Bethany had signed a deal. The video got over 10,000 views in 24 hours. Comments were full of people calling her brave and asking for advice. I didn't care about the podcast itself, but I felt uneasy, like I was being slowly written into someone else's story. Then she emailed me with the subject, "Let's talk." Her message was short, "I'd like to meet." No drama, just a conversation. "I have things to tell you. I think you'll be proud of me." No accusations, no name-calling, just calm and perfectly composed. Emily read it twice and said, "She's not trying to fix anything. She's setting a trap." I replied in one line, "Emily will be there, too." She never responded. But I felt it wasn't over. I was right. 3 days later, my parents showed up at our apartment unannounced at 7:15 p.m., while Emily and I were eating dinner. I opened the door halfway but said nothing. Dad waved like this was just a friendly visit. Mom had her purse over her shoulder like she planned to stay and said, "We just want to talk calmly." I told them they had 3 minutes, but they came inside anyway. Emily stayed in the kitchen, arms crossed, silent, no fake smiles. Everyone knew where she stood. Mom said Bethany was going through a transformative period and regretted her mistakes deeply. She claimed the podcast was Bethany's way of processing things and I shouldn't take it personally. Dad said Bethany wanted a relationship with me but didn't know how to say it. When I asked if Bethany actually told them that or if they were just hoping I'd believe it, they said nothing. Then Mom dropped the truth. Bethany was moving back in with them temporarily until she figured things out. Emily breathed out loud. The picture was clear now. They paid her tuition, let her move back, and were there to make sure I didn't make things harder. They weren't mediating, they were managing. I asked if they'd ever told Bethany what she did at the wedding was wrong. They said she was overwhelmed or didn't mean to ruin it. I pressed again, "Did either of you tell her that was wrong?" They stayed silent. That answered everything. They weren't mad at her. They were embarrassed. The easiest way to erase that embarrassment was to push it onto me. I told them I was done, with the money, the guilt, and the games. If they wanted to keep funding Bethany's life, they could, but not from me anymore. I said they did a great job raising a daughter who thinks consequences don't apply. Then I asked them to leave. They hesitated but left. Bethany never contacted me after that, but the podcast went on. Episode 2 was about narcissistic siblings, Episode 3 titled, "When They Make You Look Crazy." Emily and I laughed at that one. A few days later, I checked the lease on our apartment. We had 8 months left. I ran the numbers and told Emily we should take a trip somewhere far, warm, and free from all this drama. She smiled. The next morning, we booked round-trip flights to the Maldives and left in 6 weeks. No family, no drama, just peace. The kind of peace that finally felt earned. 2 days before the flight, I received a final message from Bethany, just a fire emoji. No context, no words, like a vague warning or a reminder that she was still watching. I showed Emily while we picked up luggage tags. She didn't even react, she just scanned her boarding pass and said, "Perfect. Let it burn." I blocked the number. That was the last loose end before our trip. There was silence from everyone else too. Dad didn't call. Mom sent one generic, "Hope you're well," text I ignored. No lectures or guilt trips anymore. I think they finally realized I wasn't going to be the one to fix what they all broke. Not this time. We left the Maldives on a Thursday morning with no layovers and no rush. I watched Emily sleep against the window as we crossed miles of open water. For the first time in years, my brain didn't feel like it was on fire, no calculations, no plans, no rescue missions, just quiet. Our bungalow was over the water with the ocean audible beneath the floorboards. A sign inside read, "No clocks." Let time be yours again. That hit harder than it should have. We never talked about Bethany during the trip, not once. Not until day 4 at breakfast when Emily asked, "Do you think they'll ever admit it?" I didn't have to ask who she meant. "No," I said. "But I think they know." I believe they do, not consciously, but in that uncomfortable silence when the scapegoat finally walks away for good. They know I was always the one cleaning up her messes. They know they let it happen because it was easier than saying no, and now they know they can't reach for me anymore. Bethany stayed with them and never found a new apartment. Her lease expired quietly, and the management company relisted the unit. They contacted me for final signature confirmation. She never thanked or apologized. She never will, but I stopped waiting for that. I didn't need the apology, I just needed it to end. The podcast continued for 2 more episodes. One about being erased by your support system, another about financial abuse inside families. I didn't listen, but Kara did. She said Bethany was stretching the truth so much it stopped making sense. People stopped engaging. Comments slowed. Sponsorship vanished. Then nothing. The silence wasn't just digital, it bled into real life. I stopped checking Bethany's social media. Mom stopped sending passive-aggressive group texts. Dad didn't mention her even when he called to ask about a mechanic. Kara told me Bethany went back to part-time classes, again using our parents' money from a rainy day fund they kept for emergencies. I almost laughed. They always had the money. They just didn't want to spend it until I refused. Emily and I moved into a better place further from the city, closer to the quiet. No more buzzing phones, no more split payments, just us. I got a new credit card and finally left the cosigner days behind. I even changed my bank account password for the first time in 6 years. No more surprise withdrawals, no more Venmo requests labeled, "Please don't ask." We never talk about the wedding anymore, it's just a strange blip in a story that no longer belongs to us. Some nights, we sit on our new porch with wine and watch the neighbor's dog chase moths under the porch light. We talk about real things, books, trips, ideas, the business Emily's planning. That old life doesn't even feel like mine anymore. It's something I watched happen, then closed the book on. Sometimes fire doesn't need to be fought. Sometimes you just let it burn itself out, and walk away finally warm.